Okay. And okay, I'll share the screen and talk about solar imaging. How's that work? Not an expert at sharing my screen. Oh, I guess this is it. Okay, can you see my screen with Saturn on it?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. All right, then we're off to the races. Let me get to the beginning here. Okay, well, first of all, for the hydrogen alpha imaging I've been doing is a lot of fun, but it's basically a variation of planetary imaging. So the critical thing with the planetary imaging and the sun is shooting a lot of frames and getting them as quickly as possible, because the sun and, for example, Jupiter change quite fast. Jupiter, you've got the rotation of the planet and the moons and the moon shadows moving fairly quickly across the face. And in the sun, it just is very dynamic and it changes fairly quickly also. So the main goal is shoot a lot of images and get them recorded as quickly as practical. Now, let's see. So what I learned is, well, I'm going to first talk about the DSLR specific issue and data and capturing images. And then the second part will be non-camera specific on how I process my images, and that can be from any camera. And both of these can refer to white light, solar, and lunar imaging as well. Now, as for the DSLR specific issue, Gary Travisano mentioned at one time an issue called one-to-one pixel resolution. And it didn't fully sink into me at the time what that was all about. So I read an article from Jerry Rodriguez on his website that goes into the details. And I decided to test the concept. So this picture you're seeing is a test image from my living room and one of my favorite books there. So this shot is a full frame of my camera. It's a Canon T7i. It's an APS-C, I think they call it, sensor. So it's not it's a 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. Anyway, this is a full resolution shot done through a program I'm going to discuss in a few minutes, Backyard EOS. And this is taken a full frame through that. This is a full frame taken just through the camera with a cable release, the same basic thing. And I can't see any significant difference between those two. However, to get pictures quickly, there's a mode called live view. And live view is the view that you get on the LCD display on the camera, basically. And so in Backyard EOS, under the planetary mode, you can do a live view recording, and it will record frames at a fairly decent rate. But let's see, it looks about the same, but let me zoom in. Okay, this is the full frame again. And you can see the words new and expanded edition on the book. When I did the live view, it's definitely inferior. So that's what Jerry Rodriguez and Gary Trapezzano and the manual for the Backyard EOS all say that's a problem. But the Backyard EOS has a feature with a button you click for 5x resolution, and it uses 1/5 of the chip, and it comes out sharper than any other arrangement. I don't understand why, but like that is sharper than the full frame, not by a lot, but a little bit. So that is a great way to take images from the planets. The only downside is, if I zoom back, you could see it's only a small part of the image, so you don't have a wide field. I cannot get with my Lunt telescope, I cannot get the entire sun in on one frame that way. But if I want to get a close-up, that definitely works, and you can composite 2 or more frames to get the sun in. So that answered that question, that that setting, the 5x setting, is the way to go on that. Now, excuse me. Jerry Rodriguez in his article mentioned about 4 different programs for using with a DSLR, and one of them was Backyard EOS. After looking at a couple of them, I chose to go with that. And let me drop this down, and gotta move this out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Backyard EOS, this is what it looks like here. And you don't really see much of it until you connect the camera. So I'm doing that now. And because I have the EOS utility on my system, that comes up first. And so I just close that, and then I can connect Backyard EOS. So here it is, aimed at the far wall in my living room. And this is a preview shot I shot a few minutes before we started. The Backyard EOS is the premium version, which is highly recommended. It's got some nice features, is a $50 program. So it's one of my more expensive programs. The other ones that I'll be talking about are mostly free ones. So anyhow, this has up here an imaging setup, a mode, which is the primary mode for deep sky imaging. So if you're using a camera to do galaxies and clusters and stuff like that, that would be the way to go. What I found is when I used that to get a full frame image of the sun, it was getting 3 seconds per frame. So for stacking purposes, I like to have about 1,000 frames. And so that's kind of a disadvantage there. What I found out is if I set my DSLR camera to the high-speed shutter setting, it will shoot 12 frames per second of JPEGs onto the memory card, which I then have to transfer manually to my computer. But that beats 3 seconds per frame. The live view is very handy for the frame and focusing. This is the frame and focus screen, and it's got a ton of features on it. No, it isn't. That's the imaging. Here we go. Frame and focus. There it is. It's got all these tools over on the middle right for focusing. What works best for the surface, like the sun, is standard deviation. And the higher the number, the better. So if I defocus that, you can see the numbers vary. And as it gets into fine focus, the number goes up. And then if I go past it, it goes back down again. And a couple handy features for, if you have a camera that can do this, you can do, there's an automatic thing here where you can remotely adjust the focus. Another thing for down here, by the way, are the, you can adjust the exposure settings to make it darker or lighter. If I go to 1/50th of a second, that's bright, and so forth. And you can go to long exposures with the bulb setting and all. You can go to, 30-second exposures, etc. But for the sun, you want to be fairly quick, short exposures. One utility that I found in the premium version that I don't believe is in the cheaper one is this HD setting. And what that lets you do is you can really tweak the contrast just on the screen. And if you're doing a solar image, that really shows you the details so you can focus on them. The sun is not real contrasty when you're looking at it through a hydrogen alpha telescope. The contrast is subtle, and the images that we show a lot of detail, sharply defined, but you don't see that as you're taking the pictures. So by playing with the contrast and gamma on here, and there's other settings here, you can invert the image or go to edge, or anything you need to help you with the focus. That's the whole purpose of that, basically. And so that doesn't affect the finish, the data you collect. It's strictly the display. And then here's the 5x setting. And there's the 5x, which can be helpful for focusing. And also that's the setting that you would use for capture if you want to get the sharpest results. One nice thing is if you double click in here, oops, I can move this around to a different spot. And because we're only using 1/5 of the chip, you can move it to a different area on the chip if it's not framed exactly the way you want it. Rather than moving the telescope for just a little bit, you can move that around. And so that's how that works. So this is a very handy unit system here for focusing. And there's a Bakhtinov filter accessory here that if you're using that at nighttime on stars, that makes the spikes easier to detect. I'm not 100% sure yet. I haven't tried that at night, but the standard deviation works best. FWHM is for stars, and HFD I think is also for stars. But the standard deviation is best for a surface like the sun or the moon. Okay, then once you have that done, you can go to Planetary, and this is where you would do your imaging if you're doing, if you're not worried about getting the full field. Go to 5x, and there's your sharp close-up view. And then you have put your target name in here, how many images you want. I've got 100 right there. I typically use 1,000. You can have it do, I normally use a JPEG. It can do an AVI at the same time, but that's just duplication. The quality is the same on both, except the AVI takes a little more hard drive space for some reason. So then you just hit record and it'll record it. This utility also is fine. If you go to the imaging screen here, the non-live, this is not the live view, this is the full screen. And you get a histogram here, and you can set up with a delay, and there's a whole bunch of settings that you can select to do, for example, multiple exposures. For example, say the center of the M42 versus the outer wispy arms. You can do multiple exposures like that. You can also do interval exposures where you're doing time lapse. You can set all that stuff up here. So it's a powerful little program. So I'm going to disconnect and shut off my camera then and show you, once you start that, that can shoot up to 30 frames per second. So once you get those onto your hard drive, what do you do with them? Well, a lot of people use a program called Registax. I used that years ago for planetary imaging. Then I stopped doing planetary imaging for a while. When I went back to open Registax and see if I wanted to use that, it looked way too complicated. So there's a lot of learning curve to Registax. So I found out that this other program, AutoStacker, and another free program, you download it free, and it does the same basic job on stacking. Registax has a feature called wavelets for sharpening, which nobody else seems to have as far as I know, but it's not easy to use. And I've been using a different program for that aspect. But this program is about as simple as you can get for stacking. So it comes up wanting for a video format. I have some image files here for this, and I have 100 frames set in here just so that it can go fast. If I did 1,000 frames, we'd have to wait for it a bit. And you get the main settings over here on the left and a view of your images on the right. First of all, excuse me, you have to select surface for solar, lunar, and deep sky if you use it for that. And then planet is for aligning the outer edges of the planet. So I want the surface on there. The rest of the stuff, just a little place. I don't know what, much about that. I just select that. Over here on the image, now these are in the order that they were taken, and I could see the sun's surface kind of breathing as the seeing varied. There are times where these little sunspots almost just, get fainter and softer. You could change the anchor point by control clicking, and so that it does the alignments anchored around something of some contrast, a feature that it can see. And basically, you can change the magnification on here. Basically, that's all you need to do at this step. And you hit analyze. And now it will, one, it will rough align all the frames. And two, it will measure the quality of all the frames. And it will resort the frames in quality order. Okay, so now it produces this graph that you can see the real wavy line is the quality in the original order. And then the line that gradually goes from the upper left to the lower right, that's the quality in sorted for the quality. So that the highest quality ones are on the left, the lowest quality on the right. And if we look at the pictures, the images here, we could see that these sunspots are fairly sharp there on the left. As I get over here to the right, they're a little softer. It's not as dramatic on 100 frames. If I had 1,000, it would be more noticeable. But let's see, so it keeps track of the timing on everything. The next step is you need to figure out how many frames are you going to put in the stack. You have a choice. You can set up to 8 stacks at one time, where it will go through and stack them 8 ways. You bottom rough rule of thumb is you want to stack where the frames are above the 50% line, as a rough rule of thumb. Now I wrote in here 50%, so that means it will produce a stack of 50% of the total frames. In this case, that would be 50 frames. And I could also put in here 75 if I want, and that'd be 75 frames. So you can do it both ways, and you have 4 options to do. So you end up with up to 8 files that it's created. Put in a name of something that you want to identify. The drizzle, I've played with very little at 1.5 drizzle. I'm not certain it's helpful, so I don't usually bother with that. Then the other thing you need to do is alignment points. You need to put in alignment points, and you can select for small ones or bigger ones. You don't want to go too big. You want it to focus on all the features. If I click on that, it puts in little boxes that's going to use for alignment. So that's a good number of alignments, boxes. So I'll hit stack. And now it goes through its process. And it's done. Now you don't see a change in the picture because I did it all and put it on the hard drive in a folder. So to see the results, I gotta move this out of the way here. Okay. Well, the next step is, now that I have a stack, is sharpening and adjusting contrast. So I use this free program called IMPPG. I saw a tutorial where they demonstrated AutoStacker and IMPPG for solar imaging. And I thought, that's great. The price is right. It's free. And it does a Lucy Richardson deconvolution, which is a fancy sounding way of doing sharpening. One of the first things to do is you see this little box that it's created here, and it's going to only process what's in that box as you make adjustments. So you want to set this to processing the whole image. So now whatever I do will affect the whole image. So I can turn up the sigma, which is the intensity of the deconvolution, and the iterations, the higher, the stronger it'll be. Now, if I turn this up a lot, you can see artifacts all over the surface there. It makes an ugly looking mess. Let me magnify this a bit so you can see better what I'm talking about. So that doesn't work too well there. So I gotta bring that down. I'm gonna go with 1.7. And then as unsharp, prevent ringing is supposed to be helpful. I don't know, unsharp masking, crank that up some until you decide whether, whether it's helping. I'll go up to there and maybe bring this thing up to about 2. Give or take that. That's how you go around, trial and error, find out what you like. But then the other powerful feature is this has a curve tool. Now there's a curve tool in Photoshop, the full Photoshop, which is real nice. But I don't have that. I have Photoshop Elements and it doesn't have a curve tool. So it's really handy to have one in here. So what you want to do is you're basically adjusting this. You see the histogram on the bottom, the gray areas that show there's the black of space, and here in this big lump is the surface of the sun. So what you want to do is use the contrast where you need it, basically. So if I bring this down and up, now I've really enhanced the contrast. And you can see all the kinds of features there that weren't there before. And this is a bit of trial and error and artistic, effort. You do this until you like the results. Now, one thing I didn't mention before is most of the time, astrophotographers of the hydrogen alpha sun take 2 separate exposures. You image one for the surface of the sun, and you use a different exposure to image the prominences, because it's a big dynamic range between those two. The prominences are much fainter than the surface of the sun, but the prominences are in here, and I can show you that by just cranking this up. Pull this down. Pull this down to keep the outside, the space black. So you can bring out the prominences. It's takes a lot of trial and error work to get a good result. I am not yet convinced that you can get as good a result as if you do the 2 exposure approach and then composite them together. Because in reality, you're imaging the prominences in the bottom of the bits of the pixels. And so you stretch them out, you can make them visible, but you don't have as many, you don't have the dynamic range in the prominences that you would if they were a separate exposure. So that's my 2 cents. It can be done, and I've done it on a few of these, but I still suspect that the better results are from the 2 separate exposures.
Hey, Wayne, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I thought someone told me once, I don't remember who, that actually with the pressure tuning, that you actually you tune at a different point to get focus on the prominences versus the surface. Did I hear that right or not?
I don't know. I find that if I tune for the surface features, it seems to me like the prominences have a wider tolerance for the tuning. And so yeah. I tend to tune for the surface features, and the prominences are there plus or minus a fair amount on the tuning.
Yeah, I can jump in here a little bit, Wayne. With the prominences are usually can be seen over a 2 to 4 angstrom band. What the surface features that Wayne shows here is more, it's sub angstrom level.
Right.
So it has a wide range. But interesting with the tuning, what you'll notice visually is if you're on the blue side, the prominences are coming towards you, you might see a different part of the prominence. And as you turn it towards the red, you'll see pieces of the blue disappear and other pieces begin to show up. But in general, if you're tuned right in the center of the hydrogen alpha band where the disk is, where Wayne has the disk here, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a pretty good prominence shot. But just for fun, it's sometimes interesting if the prominence is set up so that it's coming towards you or away from you, not a side view, you can see different pieces of it. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
Wayne, could I ask a quick
Yeah.
question? You're shooting like in 8-bit, right? You're shooting like AVI?
Yeah, JPEGs actually is what I'm typically doing, because you can get the data fast. I did it in the beginning, try JPEG and RAW, and that slowed down the transmission. Or like if I was shooting in the camera, instead of 12 frames per second that the camera is capable of, it would start at 12 and then bog down to like 1 or 2, and because of the RAW was so much bigger. So I just shoot 8-bit JPEGs.
Yeah.
And when you stack them, AutoStacker creates a 16-bit TIFF file, or at least that's what I have it set for. And so once you've accumulated 500 frames into one, you've got headspace for a much bigger bit size.
Right.
And
Right.
so what I try to do is one issue that Photoshop Elements has that isn't as much of a problem with full Photoshop is some things you try to do in Photoshop Elements won't work if it's more than 8-bit. You have to convert it to 8-bit. There's ways around it a little bit, but for some aspects of it. But yeah, but once you stack it, you end up with a 16-bit anyway. And you don't, I was experimenting with my ASI camera, and I don't think you need more than 8-bit in the raw data coming from the camera. I don't know that it makes any difference once you get 1,000 frames or so and stack them. I don't know.
Right.
Not yet
You know,
sure that worth it.
that's what I hear. But every once in a while, I'll see one of these people on YouTube and they're shooting like a SIR file, and which is much bigger. But I'm wondering, like, I have the same problem too. Like, if I want to make these prominences brighter with one exposure, they blanch out, and I'm wondering if maybe if I had shot in 16-bit, whether I would get more definition in them. But
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
But I never tried it, and I was just wondering
Yeah.
if you had any experience with that. And I
No,
think
I don't think you will, Joe, because the problem is just the exposure, because
yeah,
exposure is short, so you can't pick up like this prominence that Wayne's showing here. If that was a longer exposure, that may actually be one of those may actually arch over, and
Right.
you can't even see that, you know,
yeah,
because
but it may be harder to like. It might be. What I'm guessing is, I'm wondering if it would be easier to stretch if it was like in a 16-bit versus, you know what I mean? It won't blanch out like that. But I don't.
yeah, I
really
hear
know.
what you're saying though, but it's just you're not,
Right.
you know, you're down to. I mean, if you're only getting a couple of photons from that area,
Right.
you know, how much can you stretch? You know, where for
Yeah.
longer exposure, you might have hundreds or thousands. You
Yeah,
know,
Yeah.
in the bucket.
At this exposure, the prominence is real close to the black.
Right. Right.
And so,
and I'm shooting like half an angstrom. So I think what happens is, you know, that the photons, I mean, you know, that what's going on in those prominences is moving around so fast. It's probably getting like, you know, red shifted and blue shifted out of the zone where I can capture it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
whereas if I had a wider window, I'd probably get a lot more of them, you know?
Yeah, with prominences, Joe, once you're down about that half angstrom range, it does get tough to
sparse,
see. You don't see them as prominent, because typically, if you were to make a chromoscope, you know, just to look at prominences and having a Colding disk, you'd have a bandwidth of about 4 angstroms. Typically, that's how they're made.
Right.
So you can see all of the prominences, and they're real bright, and it's kind of
Yeah.
spectacular, but the narrower the band, the dimmer the prominence too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really saw that back when we had Solar Saturday events where we'd have, like at the time I had a PST and somebody else had a PST that was double stacked. And the view of the surface was phenomenal with a double stack, but the prominences were almost invisible
Right. That's
because the
my,
bandwidth is so narrow, it was not enough light, I think.
Yes, that's it. You're not, yeah, because you're losing a lot of it, because it's spread over several angstroms and you're taking just a small slice of that. So it's,
Yeah.
and depending what direction it's going, it's going to be, you won't see, you'll see less of it because the arc might be partially, shifted out of the band,
Right.
just based on the direction it's going.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to take, to do prominences, Joe, you really should probably, well, yours is double stacked, right?
yeah, I mean, what I can do is increase the exposure, but then, I just blow out the surface, which is okay. But sometimes when I try to combine them, if I do try to combine them, what happens is the surface is
tricky.
different, you know what I mean? So then I've
Yeah,
got
it's tricky. Yeah, it's tricky. 'Cause
it's a little tricky, and
Well,
yeah,
I'm-
because
I was looking for a way that, I could do it all at once without
you
that.
could cheat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really
Well,
can't. This is about as close as you can get. What Wayne's doing here is about as close as you can get, I think, to cheating.
Right. No,
Yeah, yeah.
I think
Well,
you're right.
I could show you the way I composite them, which is a very simple approach. I've seen descriptions where or tutorials where people go into a very complicated process to do things like compositing them. What I do is simple and it works in Photoshop Elements, so that's what I want. But my understanding is that the hydrogen alpha telescopes like mine, the Lunt, I believe is about 7/10 of an angstrom. The good
Yeah.
ones like you have, the fancier ones are a half an angstrom, and then the double stack ones can get down to 3/10 of an angstrom. But if you want the prominences, that's counterproductive. So it's a trade-off. So anyway, this is one handy thing on this utility is you can load the processing settings. So I have a bunch of files that I've created. Like this is the demo that I experimented with earlier and getting more contrast on the surface. It's a fun little utility. You can, the curve is fun to play with and try to bring out different features. But anyway, I'll go on to the next step. Once I've done that, I'll go back to Photoshop Elements, and the screen stuff is in the way here. Let's see. Okay, here is the stack that I created with 1,000 frames, stack 500 of them. So this is the actual data that I finished with, as opposed to the limited data that I showed you today just to save time. So this is the picture I ended up with from IMPPG, and here is the exposure for the prominences. So the question is, how do you get them together? What I came up with was I make a copy, let me turn that off, of the layer that has the original image. And then I use a tool over here called a magic wand tool. It's a selection tool, and have it select everything from total black to a certain number of counts above black. And it completely selected the black area. And then I used the paint brush or paint can to fill that area with transparency. And it just erased the black. So then when I combine show the two layers, voila, there's the photosphere with prominences there over the sun. Now, the higher exposure for the prominences may have bloomed out a little bit and maybe a slightly bigger diameter than it should be. I don't know. I always get a little bit of a band of white there, in addition to the prominences. I don't know. But I'm happy with
Yeah,
that arrangement.
that happens because in the overexposure, it just makes it glow a little bit bigger. So it's always a hair bigger. You know, the actual surface size will blow up. But this is really close. This is really nice.
Yeah. No, anybody that's not used to hydrogen alpha photography ought to be aware that, first of all, we're taking pictures of a view that is only red, deep red, the wavelength of hydrogen alpha. And so the human eye is not very good at distinguishing brightness levels, the subtle details that way. So when I take a picture, I have the camera set to monochrome, so I get a black and white image. Let's see, I write that down here. Thought I had listed exactly what I used. Anyway, my notes here. Oh, okay. The camera in monochrome, the picture taking mode in M for manual, and I use the HS or high speed shutter mode if I'm going to use the intervalometer to take the full frame. So you end up with a monochrome image of the sun, which shows all the details that you can get there. Now, there are two reasons to go with color that, one is color image can look prettier, it's artistic license. And the other thing is it can increase the contrast because now you not only have brightness variations, you have the brighter areas are yellower, the darker areas are redder. So you're getting your rods and cones both showing, seeing the contrast. So more often than not, I colorize the image if I'm seeing a lot of the, getting most of the sun, unless I'm just, I don't know, so there have been occasions where I don't do it, but anyway, the basic process that I chose, and I've seen people go to real complicated processes to colorize them. They go into Photoshop and they're doing this and that and having tons of things. What I do is I go to the levels, and first of all, I have to set it to RGB over here, mode RGB color. Then I go to red, and I just turn the mid-level to 1.8, and the green to 0.6, and the blue to 0.1. And that gives me a pleasing combination. I saw that in a tutorial where somebody didn't mention it, but like in one frame on the screen, he adjusted those and then it went and disappeared. So I freeze framed it to see what settings he used, and those are what he used. And I'm colorblind basically, so I'm happy with the color scheme here. I don't know, but then I also go back to the RGB and I'll tweak that. Brought the white level down a bit. I'll often raise the black level a little bit, just a little, so it doesn't start taking away some of the prominence, and the mid-level to get a little more contrast, because in the process of colorizing, sometimes you lose a little contrast, and so I tweak that a little bit too. Anyway, that produces a result that I'm happy with. And if I can close that up. Now, if I want to keep working with a 16-bit image and not go to 8-bit, if I use these settings over here on the level, the layers on Photoshop Elements, I have to reduce them to 8 bits. If I don't want to do that, I can go over to image enhance and go to adjust lighting. Oh, it won't do it now because it's already turned 8-bit. But anyway, that gives the same tool, the levels control, but it doesn't require 8-bit. And it won't, that level tool doesn't work with 8-bit. So with 16-bit, I can do that and then get the contrast set the way I want without reducing the bit depth. But then the other thing I do is in Photoshop Elements is if I want to match the view from Gong, their website, then I have to flip the image because my telescope camera combination gives me a vertical flip. And also a lot of times I'll do a little crop if need be to get rid of like the gap at the bottom. So basically that's the process I've been going through. Let me, does anybody have any questions?
So when
Oh,
you,
wait a minute. Well, before I leave this, let me go to the last shot here, just that I have here pull up. This is a composite of each of the steps. This is a roll frame here, which ironically looks almost the same as this stacked frame, maybe a little sharper than the stacked frame, but in reality, there's a lot more depth, much better signal to noise ratio in the stack frame, and then that can be sharpened. This is the result from IMPPG. And then here's down below is the monochrome composite and the color composite. So that's a summary of what I have been going through on this.
so when you colorize, Wayne, you just adjust the mid-level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw that on a website, on a tutorial somewhere. And after seeing several tutorials where people are using full Photoshop and using tons of tools that I have no concept of how to use them or what they are, and I'm pretty sure I don't have them on my version. I saw somebody do this with the levels, and it's gives me a result I'm happy with. So I've got the red
That's
at
a nice color,
1.8
nice color combo.
and green at 0.6 and blue at 0.1. And I just plug those in and the colors are set. Then I just go to the RGB and tweak the contrast and the brightness levels, just stretch it a little bit if it seems like it needs it. So,
Wayne, I use the Photoshop one with the curves and all that stuff. And
right.
this is, I think, just as good and easier, and I think your results are fabulous,
Yeah, I've seen people do all kinds of stuff with masks and blending, and I
Yeah.
don't know that you can get, you can get really complicated. I guess if you have all those tools, you want to use them, but
Right.
the level tool does an adequate job as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
and
There's
it's simple and quick.
a website. I used to go on, Greg Peoples, I think. He had a site. I think he still has it, but years ago, he was one of the pioneers in hydrogen alpha. And
Right.
that bright ring around, what he would do is he would have like an image for the prominences and an image for the disk. And the image for the prominences in that layer, he would reduce it by a few pixels and get rid of like the line on the surface. But personally, I think it's beautiful. Like I don't have any problems with it, but that's what he used to do. He used to
Yeah, that
reduce it a
doesn't
little
bother
bit.
me.
Right.
The narrow line on the edge doesn't bother me. So
No, I think it looks great,
it's
but he would
personal taste
reduce
issue.
that image by a few. And so what happens is everything would shrink
Mm-hmm.
to below the disk image. You know what I mean? So you only saw the prominences and not the edge. But I think your results are great.
Yeah, you can do that. Just select the layer of the exposure for the prominences and just scale it by a % or two, but I don't know. I'm fine with this. It works for me. And if I wanted to do, like someone's asked me, and I know Tom does this too, where you're showing a single prominence. All you do is you do an exposure for the sun, for the prominences. And then you just black out the sun by creating a large black circle in Photoshop over it. And you just tweak the size of the circle until it matches the curvature of the sun. And, you know, it doesn't take any complex gymnastics in Photoshop to do that. And that can produce a nice shot of a prominence. But I've been finding this fun to do. It's, you know, every day is something very different. Of course, I daily will look at the gong view, mostly from Cerro Tololo, Chile, and or Learmonth, I think it is, for Australia, something like that, that have the best images, and I'll see all kinds of interesting activity going on, but it's pouring down rain outside, or or it's crystal clear, sunny day, but I'm busy with other things and I can't take a picture. So, you know, it's just one of those things. But you can, on Gong, I can see ahead of time, okay, this isn't worth it for me to bother, or it is. So.
Yeah, I'll end up using that Gong site too, Wayne, because I just do it just to see. I may have plans for the day, but if it's something really extraordinary, then I'll go and I'll set up. But if it's, or if I have the time, but it's a pretty plain sun, it's probably not worth doing all the setup. I'm not going to get any great, you know, especially
Right.
the last few months. The atmosphere has been so bad, especially in the daytime. It's always worse in the daytime because it's the heating of the air with the sun. But when it's really noisy, it's hard to get a good image. It's really bad seeing. But if it's a really tempting object, you still just go and you try to get what you can, you know.
Yeah, well, I've always heard it best time to see or photograph the sun is around 10 in the morning till noon, before the ground heat. Well, the sun's high enough in the sky, but the ground's not heated up that much to cause turbulence as much. If you look at it at 3 in the afternoon, it's swimming terribly. It's the atmosphere was very active, and you know, you're not going to see details.
What about a cold winter day versus a hot summer day? Is there a preference for imaging?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, the morning is always better when, like when Wayne said, when the sun's high enough, you know, you get to a certain point. You probably, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know, Mark. I mean, it's like all other, you know, photography, especially planetary or lunar and solar, they're all in the same kind of group, you know. You're more sensitive to what's close to you, you know, looking over a driveway, looking close to a house, or, you know, even if it's a neighbor's roof or something, you know, there's certain areas where maybe the atmosphere is cooler, but if it's over the neighbor's house and it's
I was just gonna say, a hot roof on a
radius.
cold winter day may be the worst case scenario.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So you have to kind of take everything with a grain of salt there. But if you can get an area where it's fairly green, which is shooting over, you know, and it's before noon, that's the time you want to try it.
Well, then maybe shooting away from the city in the countryside would give you better result, generally speaking, than being in the city.
Oh yeah, but that's true for all the planetary stuff,
Yeah.
you know, because you get rid of all the cement heat, you know, and everything on the ground that's just radiating upwards.
Right.
So it's always good to be shooting over grass if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, generally also, I've always felt that the winter time, you get the dry winter air, which is better for transparency. So if you're looking at galaxies and things like that, that's ideal. but the humid, muggy air in the summer is more stable. So,
Yeah, actually,
so the seeing tends to get better.
yeah, the best lunar and planetary times are on the muggy nights, actually, where it's just a shade hazy.
Yeah.
Now with the sun, that's one thing though that doesn't work quite as well with the sun because any kind of haze in the sky affects the ability to see the prominences and stuff. They blend in because the water lines come up and stuff, and kind of fog out the contrast. You want really the bluer the sky, the lower the water vapor in the sky, the more contrast you'll get with the sun.
Yeah.
So then I
It
suppose
doesn't take-
shooting at high elevation probably would, all else being equal, be preferred,
Probably. Yeah.
Yes.
solar.
So,
Yeah, the slightest cirrus clouds can really wreak havoc with prominences, with the visibility of them. They just, you can have what they call a clear day, and it's thin cirrus clouds, and you can't see a prominence. So, yeah, despite the exposure here that makes the prominence look fairly bright, they're actually substantially darker than the surface. And so when you're visually observing, you need good transparency in addition to good seeing.
And they're kind of
Great.
polar opposites,
Yeah,
typically.
you usually get one or the other, and so it's a compromise. Yeah.
Great talk, Wayne, and great pictures too. I'm wondering, have you had your ASI camera long enough to be able to sort of know whether or not you're going to get better results because of the higher frame rate or the other factors compared to what you're doing with the DSLR?
Well, it's definitely a higher frame rate. It's more optimized for the job. I've taken a few shots with it, not much yet, but it's a little bit, it's a little bigger chip than the 5X view that I was getting from my DSLR. It's not, I can't get the whole sun in one, but I can get about half of the sun. And I've got the 385 ASI camera, which has a more rectangular chip. And so I can get the full width of the sun, but only about maybe 2/3 of the height of the sun if I'm doing prime focal. So I've been doing either prime focal or 2.5 Barlow power mate for getting in close. But I think I like it. It's a whole lot lighter on the optical train than the DSLR body is, which is a good thing. As far as the finished results, I don't know if it definitely can get much faster frames. If I go to stay with 8-bit and a smaller number of pixels, I can get up to 500 pixels per second, or 500 frames per second.
With the ASI?
Yeah, with the ASI, as opposed to 30 on my DSLR. So that's a big advantage. If I'm taking 1,000 frames, it goes by very quickly.
Yeah, so you have better opportunity to freeze the seeing in that situation. Has the sensitivity, I mean, one of the things I noticed with the DSLR with planetary imaging, not as much with solar, but more so with planetary, is that you have this trade-off between exposure time and in other words, brightness, and also frame rate. So, you can push the gain, but then you increase the noise. So there are all these things competing with one another. So finding that sweet spot for me with the DSLR seemed to be a little harder to do or trickier to find a sweet spot than it is, say, with the dedicated planetary camera.
Yeah, well, I've been using fire capture for the ASI camera, and I still have yet to feel comfortable with the trade-off with the gain setting. You know, how much gain is okay, how much is too much. I know ISO, I'm have enough photographic experience that I'm used to the concept of ISO, but
Yeah.
the numbers of the gain are kind of arbitrary or whatever, and I don't know how much is too much.
Yeah,
And the-
I watched a couple tutorial things like YouTube videos with Damian Peach, and they actually like Chris Go and Damian Peach, they both said they just max out the gain because the because the dedicated cameras are so good nowadays that their electronic noise is so low that they just tend to put it at 100 or, you know, whatever the scale is for that particular camera. And that was from both of them, which actually surprised me because I tend to try to keep it low, but
Yeah, I tend to be a gain shy myself.
yeah. So I don't know, Tom, if you've had
Yeah,
experience
it's
or
a
Joe
funny
or
thing
anyone
because
else.
if you look at the curves in these ASI these ZWO ASI family, there's the online manuals you can look at, and they have all the curves, lots of curves. They have a whole page of curves, which gives you a lot of data there. And what it shows is as the gain creeps up, the noise drops off. But they show you kind of the point of diminishing returns as far as, because if the gain goes up, your dynamic range falls off too. So you're trading dynamic range, and they always show in their charts kind of the ideal gain where it gets interesting. Like on a 174 mm, I know Joe's got one of those, black and white camera. It's around 189. So I always put my gain at about 192 or something, and that gives me the highest dynamic range with, and at the point where the amount of noise reduction increasing the gain is very negligible, but I keep my dynamic range up around 12 stops, you know, which is pretty big versus getting, if I move the gain all the way over, you know, I'll be down in the, you know, maybe 6 stops or something, you know, so it's a lot less from a dynamic range standpoint. So
Interesting.
I use those guides in that manual as kind of experimenting around. That seems to be the best results I've gotten. I'm happy with that. So I use that kind of blindly now. And all the cameras, I just go to the manual. I just look at it. Okay, when this camera, it says 89 or 90, so I'll put it at 9. I'll put it 1 or 2 higher just in case, you know. And some of these cameras have real step feature. If you look at the graphs, it isn't like an asymptotic curve or something. What you have is it's going along and there's a step, a sharp step in noise reduction. I mean, it drops 80% over a gain range of about 1 or 2, you know? So you're at 70 and it's real high, you're at 75 and it's real low. And then it stays.
Yeah, with the 2600, it's at 100. So I keep my gain at like 101 on that. But shooting Planetary, like if you're shooting Saturn is relatively dim. The albedo is so low that like on my camera, you know, if I'm shooting it at like at f20, I have to jack up the gain. You know?
Yeah, there are. Yeah, the thing is, that's where it gets that's kind of a trade-off. On the sun and the moon, it's not a problem, you know, because there's plenty of light, you know, and you're shooting in the, you know, millisecond and less type range. You know, you're shooting really fast with the regular settings. When something like Saturn is a good point. I mean, Mars is a little brighter than that. And Jupiter's pretty bright, but Saturn is dull. I mean, it is 2.5 times duller.
You almost can't do it. Otherwise, you're shooting at such a low frame rate. You know, you never get done the video, you know? Yeah.
And you want to get, and around here, because the atmosphere changes a lot, and this is really true, and this is even more so on the sun. This is where you really gain wing with that dedicated camera, is if you're shooting at, like I used to shoot around, well, I had a slower cable setup, but I was shooting, you know, 110, 120 frames a second. And what you find is if you get that half a second of clear in that 30-second exposure, I try to limit the sun to like 30 seconds because it changes pretty quickly. Especially if you're using a Barlow lens, So if you get half a second, well, you've got 50 good frames, you know, and that's pretty cool. And then maybe it's kind of messy for 15, 20 seconds, and you pick up 3/4 of a second. Well, now you got 125 nice frames to stack, you know, and you want to get in that 200 or 300 range. I like to be in, you know, to stack. So I try to shoot about 1,500 frames or so, and then I kind of call it quits and try another one, et cetera. But you want to keep your frame rates high. And that's true with the planets too. You got to keep your frame rates high because the seeing is so transient. I mean, if it's clear for half a second. If you're doing 10 frames a second, well, you got 5 good frames. Well, that's not much. I mean, you know, you need a lot of those. You need a lot of good to make a good stack. You're on there. You're shooting a 5-minute, you know, video, which is fine for maybe Saturn, and you might be able to sort of get away with it on Mars, although not great, I guess. But on Jupiter, you don't have a chance with that long of exposure. You're gonna be blurring things like crazy.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll hit the manual and study those graphs and see if I can.
Yeah, you look at it. They're going to have
understand
one of the graphs, either the gain graph or another graph, the noise graph, because you'll see that there is an arrow at the bottom of the graph and it points up, and there's the number. It's the actual value of the gain. And you'll notice if you go up that chart, you can see where the dynamic range is at that level, where the where everything is, you know, at when the gain is set at that level. And it's a pretty good rule to follow. I mean, I use that when I'm doing my I hesitate to call it deep sky, but I'm doing my my enhanced visual astronomy type of thing, where I collect some souvenirs along the way. I will use the gain that's recommended for the camera. So on the 174, I'll use a 189 or basically a 192 maybe gain. I won't jack it up, and that seems to work pretty well because it does give you dynamic range is always good, you know, because that just you have more of a chance of the more subtle grays and things like that, you know.
Right.
And that's what you'll
ask you a question about that, because I'm wondering if your object doesn't have a lot of dynamic range. In other words, it's all kind of gray, not anything super bright or super black. Do you really need the dynamic range for that type of an image, or am I just not understanding dynamic range?
No, that's true. That's true. And that's
That
why
is
you can
true.
shoot it in 8-bit, you know, because the dynamic range isn't that great, really, you know, with these planets.
So like with Orion, you know, having a high gain might not be a good choice because of the low dynamic range. But for something like a dark nebula, which is just really faint, bumping up the gain probably would be a really good idea.
Yeah, I think that's also why the two, you know, planetary like masters, planetary imaging masters like Damian Peach and Chris Go mentioned that they jacked the gain all the way up, is because with Jupiter and Saturn, which is what they're really imaging, it's not very high dynamic range.
Yeah.
So they don't. I think it's exactly your point that if you don't need the dynamic range, then why not go with the high frame rate that you get from higher gain?
Yep.
Because you're increasing the, you know, effective sensitivity of the camera, and you're stacking so many frames that your noise is going to come down significantly, you know, due to the signal averaging.
Right.
Right.
You know what's funny about that though, when you jack the gain up, I mean, you can jack it up, like say it goes up to 5, maybe the max is 500 on a given camera, and your prime setting for high dynamic range is around 190. I mean, it's all pretty good to about 300. You get around 350, 400, you know, 450. If I want to go and focus on a bright star, if I'm doing the deep sky stuff, and I'll get a bright star, and I'm looking, I don't use a mask, a Batinoff mask. I use just the spikes from my spider I can focus on, because they'll actually split when I'm out of focus. And so I'll jack the gain up. But if the gain's above like 450, it's almost useless because there's sparks everywhere happening on the screen. I can see sparks coming out everywhere. So it's just the lines get fatter. It gets really kind of difficult to see.
Right.
So I bring it down to about 350, where I get a significant increase in gain, but it's still sharp. So I mean, to max the gain all the way, I can't. I mean, I can see on the graph that the noise is supposed to get lower, but on the screen, I see sparks flying. So
Yeah,
You know,
you have a lot fewer photons, to work with,
Yeah.
as your exposure time gets less and less,
I would think the amplifier noise would increase, and the heat from the amplifier.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the whole equation, if
Yeah. Well, you're
you know,
greatly
'cause-
amplifying fewer photons,
Yeah.
and that's one reason for the sparks. You know what I mean?
yeah, because you're picking up anything at all is gonna fire off, something.
Right, right.
Yeah, you're basically amplifying noise.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I don't understand. I mean, they're obviously very successful. So I mean, what they're doing works. But
Yeah,
to say to max the gain out, it's I haven't had that experience. I haven't tried it. Maybe if you did it real fast and I guess if you did it and you brought the exposure way down, to make it match or so it's not overexposed at all. And if you stack them, maybe it equals out. I don't know.
Yeah, I was surprised. I mean, I actually on the YouTube videos went backwards to make sure I heard it right, because I'm always kind of gain stingy because with my background in electrical engineering, you always try to be sensitive to noise, and noise increases with increased gain. So
Yeah.
it's just in my nature to not push gain higher than it needs to be, because you're basically
Yeah.
increasing noise, which you don't want.
yeah,
But
Yeah.
maybe there's a factor too. They were both using QHY cameras, and their gain went to 100. And I'm assuming it's sort of a scale that I know there's the ZWO stuff that I just recently got familiar with. The gain numbers are kind of arbitrary to me. Some go to 300,
Oh
some
yeah,
go
I
to
know. Every
150.
camera's different.
I don't know
Yeah,
what it really means. Like, yet
Yeah.
when I'm using it with the ASI Air, it goes to 100. It's the same camera,
Yeah.
and in like the ZWO software, like if I'm using their ASI imaging stuff, they give you the actual gain number, and if you're using the ASI Air, it goes to 100. So it's kind of like, what does that mean? That to me, it
Well,
says that the ASI Air is doing a sort of a scale. Like if the camera goes to 300 and they go to 100, well, then 100 means 300 to the camera. It's just a scale from
Yeah,
0 to 100.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because if I use the software that comes with the ASI cameras, the regular capture software,
Right.
the gain on the I think it's the 174. One of my cameras goes to 300, but on SharpCap it goes to 450.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Exactly.
So it's like, what's happening here?
Exactly. What does that mean?
well,
it's a
on
little-
FireCap with the ASI, it as you move up the gain, it suddenly gets this large yellow zone on the slider. What does that mean? I don't know. The tutorials
Caution,
are
Will
limited
Robinson.
on
Caution, Will Robinson.
Yeah. That's
I
why
don't know
we
what
run
it means, yeah.
experiments now and then, right?
right.
Like your experiment with the 5x mode,
Yeah.
to get the 1-to-1 pixel stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It amazed me how much sharper that 1-to-1 pixel setting was. But what I still don't understand is why the full frame wasn't equal to that. And
Yeah, I don't quite
I don't
understand
know.
it either. I mean, from what I've sort of gleaned from it, because I've never heard a good explanation either from Jerry or any other source. Yet everyone talks about it as if it's a fact. Like as if this is obvious. It's just 1-to-1, so it's better.
Right.
But what I've kind of gleaned from it, or at least what I've done to maybe make some sense of it in my head, whether it's right or wrong, is that there's no sort of interpolation of the readout of those pixels, so that the read engine is actually taking every in that 5x mode, in that live view 5x mode, every bucket, every cell in that CMOS array is being read out directly. So there's no sort of interpolation in terms of the image processing that's done on the back end. Because if you look at most cameras, you know, they have really sophisticated image processors built into the DSLR. That's why you can, you know, flavor the JPEG however you want. You can make it vivid, or you can make it sharper. You know, they're using unsharp mask. They're using curves. They're doing all that stuff instantaneously when you take that picture. And I think that that 5x mode in live view is sort of just it's almost a native mode where it's pulling those photons or those electrons generated from the photons directly out of the cell, reading them into the amplifier, and then putting them out into the, you know, into the file.
Yeah, the manual for the backyard EOS has a write-up about the 1-to-1 pixel issue. By the way, I forgot to mention the backyard EOS. They also sell a Nikon version, backyard Nikon, so that you can get it in both flavors. I'm impressed with that program.
Has it been stable for you? Has backyard EOS been stable?
I've had a couple glitches where it didn't do what I wanted it to do a couple times, and it's been fairly stable. There's something I did recently where I hit a button for a feature that apparently I don't have. Maybe it was something for a guide scope or whatever, because you can use a guide scope with it, and but whatever it was, it just crashed out and closed. So it's not perfectly stable, but what does work is pretty good as far as I'm concerned.
Good.
Now, Jerry Rodriguez mentioned, I think, 4 DSLR apps for capturing, and this was like the second one I looked at, and I decided I was happy with that, and I didn't look at the others.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, I had an issue with stability, and it wasn't anything related to the camera. It was software that Canon had like updated. So one of the things that you find backyard EOS, you can't have your utility open, your EOS utility, but also any other Canon software that might be in. I had a video conferencing software that would randomly crash out backyard EOS. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay. Yeah, I had used it years ago with my old Canon Rebel when I first started to do astrophotography with the DSLR, and it was quite good. And then when I guess it was 2 years ago, I got like a sample. I had bought it back then, and then something was like the license, they wouldn't let me use it. So I wound up doing the trial. I requested like the 30-day trial. And I had a lot of problems with it, a lot of camera disconnects, things like that. And I got really frustrated. And I don't know if it was just a buggy release that I happened to, you know, be in sync with when I was experimenting with it. And I tried to get them to extend the trial period so I could try it on a different release, because they had subsequently come out with another release, like it was weeks later. So I thought maybe it was just a buggy release that they fixed right away, but they never responded. They never returned the emails when I requested an extension, even though they on their website indicated that you could get an extension. And I never went back to it since. And it's not because it's bad or anything. It's just because I think the time that I happened to try it again, I just had a bad experience with it.
Yeah, well, most of the stuff I've tried has worked quite well. One thing that I had troubles with, I demonstrated how you can, that 5X view, you can move it around to different parts of the chip to center what you want to photograph.
Yeah.
I was out imaging the sun and shifted that, and it ignored what I did and got it, you know, didn't register the changed position. So that may be a bug in the program.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Are there?
When I do it in-house here, when I experiment with it, it appears to work, but I don't know.
They all have their quirks.
Yeah.
There isn't a piece of
It's-
software out there without its quirks.
Yeah, well, it's not a big company. It's just one guy, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I used to
Wait.
use a program called K3 CCD
Yeah, yeah.
tools.
Yeah, I
And I
remember
like
that.
that a lot for planetary work. And as far as I could tell, that's long gone and not supported anymore. But it was one guy and he lost interest in it or went to bigger and better things. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah,
I
that
got a
was
question.
standard.
For those of you that use an ASI camera, have you any familiarity with the ASI Studio software from ZWO?
I
haven't-
used that originally when I first got my 485.
Uh-huh.
I used that ASI Studio because I hadn't played with Sharp Cap or Fire Capture. And it seemed to work quite well. It was a little awkward because every kind of type of imaging is sort of a different module,
Yeah. There's
and they
five-
all had separate setups. So like, you would do something a little like I would go to Live View or something like that, and it was bright white because I hadn't changed it to like nighttime colors and stuff. So I found that a little awkward, but it seemed fairly stable. And it's funny when I've had trouble with other software. Like when I was using Fire Capture, I had some hiccups with that, and I wound up going back to the ASI Studio as kind of let me just make sure the equipment's working,
Right.
because it was always the most stable out of the ones that I tried, even though I don't tend to use it for imaging.
Yeah, I just downloaded it because I wanted to get the serial number off my camera, and apparently there's no place to read the serial number. You have to read it off of the information on the camera. But yeah, there's an ASI cap, there's imaging, deep sky imaging. I should say there's a planetary imaging module, deep sky imaging, live stacking, a FITS viewer, which is what I used, I think, to see the serial number, and then deep sky stacking. So I've used the ASI Air, system, and so it probably has a lot of the same functionality as what's in this ASI Studio. So I've never used it before, but I was just curious what other people thought of it.
It seemed pretty good. It seemed pretty good from what the limited amount of time I spent with it.
Yeah.
I kind of liked playing with that live view mode when I first got the camera, because it really did a good job with like I was shooting M42 was the first thing I tested the camera with, and I was surprised how well it handled the dynamic range in that live view mode. It didn't blow out the core, the trapezium. It didn't blow that out, and it's just, I was thinking, wow, I wonder what they're doing there to kind of have that pseudo high dynamic range kind of mode.
You mean the live stacking mode? Is that the live mode?
Yeah, that live stacking mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. That's in SharpCap.
Yeah.
And I haven't tried that, but that's on the paid version, I guess?
I think I am not sure what SharpCap. I know, like with the ASI Air, that's one of the imaging modes is live.
Yeah,
And with the ASI Studio, that's one of the imaging modes. I think, Tom, you've played with that, right?
The free level of SharpCap still allows you to use the live view and all that, because that's what I used to decide whether I was going to get spend the $18 a year or whatever it is to get the pro version. It's not much, but and that has a couple more features in it. But yeah, but you could experiment with just download SharpCap and just use the live stacking if you wanted to, or use the live stack with the ASI software they give you. And that's a lot of fun, actually, because even all these planetary cameras, if you're just in your backyard and they're not cooled or anything, but you can still see an awful lot. So it's kind of fun just as a visual tool. You can go in there and live stack, and in a minute you're looking at galaxies that look better through a smaller scope in your backyard than they do at Cherry Springs with a big scope, in like a minute. So I mean, it's kind of fun just to go through these fainter galaxies that are kind of just to pull them out from your backyard. It's fun.
Yeah, yeah. I used SharpCap for the Revolution Imager when we were doing the COVID Star Party
Oh, right.
format, and that worked out well for that. For some reason, I decided on, I forget exactly why, I started the learning process for fire capture for the ASI camera, and it seems pretty good, but I don't think it has any live stacking feature.
Yeah, that seems to be the preferred software for the planetary captures. I see that's what Chris Go and Damian Peach use. They use the fire capture. I think, Joe, you use that too for planetary.
Yes, yeah, I do. And originally, like you, Gary, I started with the other programs too, but just about everything I read said that fire capture is much better and more stable and less buggy. But to tell you the truth, I'm not sure that I'm the person to ask, but it seems to work well. I mean, that's all I can say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I learned just recently, I was listening to that. There was a workshop by the Delaware Astronomical Group last Friday night. They had a guy from Cyprus on, who's a planetary photographer, and it was really excellent. Lou had sent an invite out because everybody was invited in the Astro Imagers, I think. And anyway, I just downloaded a free copy of the fire, the fire capture, I guess it's called.
Yeah.
And I just downloaded, but the reason I downloaded is because the importance, I didn't really realize, I didn't take it seriously, the importance of an atmospheric dispersion, an ADC, atmospheric dispersion corrector, I guess it's called.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the guy was demonstrating that. That was really incredible. But you have to keep adjusting it like every 20 minutes or so because your telescope moves, the atmosphere, you're changing, the dynamics are changing. It's a pair of prisms you're adjusting on the inside. And fire capture it looks, I went to SharpCap, and there's a tool in SharpCap, because I use SharpCap for everything. But it looks like it's a multi-step process where in fire capture, it looks like you just hit the one button and it gives you just a quick graphic, and you just kind of move it, and the graphic just changes in real time, and you see it and you're done. It takes like, it looked much quicker. So I downloaded it just to, because I actually just ordered a atmospheric dispersion corrector because the guy was so convincing on this thing. I mean, it was remarkable, the difference in the results. And all those guys, the Christopher Goes, the Damian Peaches, they all use them and all.
Yeah.
I know that I was with some fellows up at Stellafane last year from the Copernic group, and they had one, and visually it was a remarkable difference on Jupiter just to see it. Visually, you could just adjust it and the image got much more contrast, much better. The detail came right up. So it was pretty impressive. So the ZWO, I mean, they used to cost thousands of dollars, or at least $1,000, and the ZWO models come way down, and that's like 130 or something. So it's much, it's more reasonable, it's more attainable. So I haven't played with it. I just got the box. There's no instructions in the box, just a little piece. And so you can go online and kind of get the idea, but there's YouTube and they give you the thing. But most people use fire capture because there's a nice little tool in fire capture. And as you can just move these because it's a pair of levers you move simultaneously and you balance them because you're rotating the prisms, the exact amount on both prisms. And it looks easy, but not real easy. It's like super simple, but it's a little bit subtle. But
I just bought one too, Tom, and I haven't used it yet. But as I understand it, it's got a level built into it so that you can try to get the prisms co-aligned with the horizon, right?
Yeah, that's
then the two prisms, you just adjust the gap.
Right.
And it just basically takes that chromatic diffraction out of light coming through the atmosphere.
Yeah, the problem is, the level works pretty well, I guess, if you have a refractor or an SCT. But if you have a Newtonian, that level doesn't mean hell beans because you're at some crazy angle, So So what the manual said, the ZWO manual, because nobody really talks about this, it just says get even with the horizon. It's like, okay, great. What if you can't even see the horizon, you know?
Yeah.
But they suggested finding like a distant building, like an eave of a building or a line of gutters, you know, and get on that. But I'm not even sure. I mean, it's nighttime after all. I'm not sure how it's going to be to pick up. So that's why it's going to be a little experimentation there. But they have a little white screw basically, which they use to lock with the horizon. As the horizon's changing, your scope's moving, and I think you probably kind of get a pretty close with just an eyeball of that being level. You know what I mean? You can get pretty close. Probably not exact, but maybe close enough. We'll see what kind of things I stumble into.
That raises the
I
question
suspect it'll
then
be a challenge.
about, do you need any correction if you're looking straight up? And do you need more correction if you're closer to the horizon?
Yes, you need more correction closer to the horizon. Looking straight up, probably really minimal, but below 45 degrees, it's pretty big deal. And I first got them, I first heard about them, I thought it was more to correct. So it talks about, you know, blue on one side of Jupiter, red on the other. And I thought it's chromatic aberration. But the first thing they say is, this has nothing to do with chromatic aberration of your system. You can have a pure Newtonian, nothing to do with that. It's the atmosphere is the lens in essence, or the prism. And that's splitting apart, that's causing the refraction. So anytime you have refraction, you have the rainbow effect, right? So you're going to get it. So it's particularly bad, well, for the next few years with Saturn and Jupiter, the last few, and even the next couple, where just when there's anything below 45 degrees, it's pretty dramatic, they say. And in these videos examples he was showing, you know, he showed examples of like a live video of a video feed he had taken, and you know, without having the ADC in there, and then putting one in, and the contrast came way up. And he says, you know, you have to have one of these if you're going to be serious.
Yeah, one of the things
like, huh.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just.
One of the things I heard them say is that, you know, if you have it on an equatorial mount, the angle with respect to the horizon changes, you know, like it has to be pretty much, so yeah, they said you had to keep an eye on that, you know.
Yeah, every 20 minutes they say. I mean,
Right.
the ZWO manual says once an hour. Other people on different YouTubes are saying 20 to 30 minutes. This guy in Cyprus says every 20 minutes he tweaks his.
Right.
It's a little bit annoying, you know.
Right.
But
Yeah,
if
I
it
guess
improves the image, what the heck?
Yeah, exactly. And for Planetary, you're taking short, you know, relatively short captures anyway.
Yeah, so you go out for 15 minutes of shooting, you know, and then you give it a little tweak and go again. And
yeah, you got to slew to your local rain gutter on your neighbor's house. I have to see if that's in the like, is that under the, you know, object for something, rain gutter? Like, what catalog is that sitting?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. It isn't in the Messier catalog or the NGC catalog. I gotta find which one that's in so I can salute to it easily. I'm not sure how that even is going to look, because I mean, it's nighttime, right? And you're looking now. Am I looking? If I'm using the camera, looking through the camera, I mean, what am I seeing here? You know, with a gutter and a dark gutter, and you know, I'm looking at the sky glow above the roof or something. You know, and I can say, okay, that's parallel, and try to go with it's. And exactly what you see as far as you're looking through it to get it even, because with the camera, it depends how the camera is oriented, you know, so it implies more of an eyepiece type of situation. And even there, it's like, and there, it basically, I guess you had to put an eyepiece in and you just move it so that the white, you know, if you kept both eyes open, I guess, one through the eyepiece, you kind of do what Galileo used to do. The one eye through the eyepiece, looking at the roof, the other eye open, looking at that little white dot, and just lining them up, you know. I guess that's what you would do, but
Yeah.
I guess you're basically just leveling.
That seems to be the biggest hurdle with using it right now. I think it's going to be the biggest.
Would this be an argument for using an alt-az mount for this type of photography? Because with an alt-az mount, you don't have that kind of rotation with respect to the horizon.
Yeah, but you get field
You get image
rotation, though.
rotation though. You get image rotations and stuff.
Yeah,
Well,
you have bigger fish to fry with
Yeah.
field rotation.
Yeah, field
Okay,
rotation.
so
is
you're
bad.
saying in terms of just you're gonna get, well, because the image is rotating, you're gonna get blurring that you wouldn't get with an EQ mount, is what you're saying.
Yeah, you'll get in addition to translation errors like this, you know, if you're dithering or something, you're going to get rotation and also scaling errors
Yeah, it
with the
gets-
peripheral stars tend to smear.
Yeah, you really want to. Yeah, an equatorial mount's just easier.
Yeah.
Well, then
I mean,
maybe,
they used to sell, I mean, I guess they still sell field derotators and stuff like that, for like for the fork mounts, you know, like the LX200s or LX90s, you know, stuff like that. They would
Yeah,
sell, for people that were using a alt-az, they would sell field derotators that went into the visual back. But from what I've heard, I've never used one, but from what I've heard, they work sort of so-so. They don't really solve the problem.
I suppose a real high-end installation, you might have some kind of a accelerometer and a servo motor that would just keep the atmospheric a distortion corrector always oriented, you know, based upon the horizon. I suppose you could do something like that if you had the money.
I don't know if they
Yeah,
use
yeah.
them on big observatories. I don't know. I'm not sure what kind of. That would be a big unit, I guess. That'd probably be a 3 or 4 inch prism unit. You know, would be pretty good
Yeah.
size, not an inch and a quarter. You know.
Well, they might be shooting monochrome, you know. They might be shooting monochrome, so maybe it's not an issue, you know.
That's
Oh,
right.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
I don't know. Mine shoots, you know, like I take mine in RGB. So I don't, you know, but I still have to line everything up, you know, I still have to line up the 3 images. So that, I mean, that's a bit of work, but it kind of eliminates the atmospheric dispersion, at least to some extent, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But
So
I guess-
why do the sort of the professional planetary people tend to use them? Because they're all shooting monochrome. Is there
I'm
some
not
other
sure,
effect?
Gal. You know, I think in the last few years, a lot of them just switched to one-shot color. It seems, you know, that group down in Brazil, like they all shoot one-shot color. I think the color cameras have gotten so good that they've pretty much supplanted them for a lot of that planetary work, you know.
Interesting. Okay.
It just seems in the last few years, you know, as soon as I brought my monochrome camera, it seems like it's like one-shot color.
Yeah, I think he said in our video that rotation is why he had to do color, because Jupiter and the planets are rotating so fast that he can't do monochrome and get the clearness and everything stacked
Yeah.
together.
Well, you can, you know, but like I have to keep like for Jupiter, for instance, I have to keep it really short, you know, and then I use Winjo posts to, you know, to de-rotate everything, and it seems to work okay, you know, but I think people just kind of gave up, you know. I think the one-shot color cameras just became so good that you know, a lot of people moved from monochrome, you know. But I've got the filter wheel and the monochrome camera, so you know, at this point, I figured I'd just, you know, stay with that.
Interesting. Yeah. I was talking with Frank Colosimo last week. Tracy and I went up for Thursday and Friday night, and he came over, and I had the ASI 2600 MC on there, and on the TV 101, and I was just, you know, kind of getting my feet wet with it.
Yeah.
And he said, I mentioned monochrome cameras and filter wheels, and he said, no, he said, I'm looking at what you have. He said, that's what I want to move to. He said, because it's just so much overhead and it takes just so much more time
Yeah.
to get the exposures you need, because you're basically not tripling it, but you're significantly increasing the amount of time with the color
Right.
channels.
Right. And you have one more program running now. Now I've got to run a program for the filter wheel, you know, and wires to the filter, you know, you
Yeah,
have
it's just more
power
stuff.
to the filter wheel, and you have a USB to the filter wheel, and you know.
Yeah, and
I mean,
every time you change filters, you have to refocus,
right,
right?
right.
Because your focus point changes
It
with
looks like Bell
with the, you know,
telephone,
whatever
know?
thickness the glass happens to be.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that I have it. I really do. I mean, it makes, you know, like I can shoot the sun and it's great for shooting the moon. But you know, for shooting the planets, I think, you know, I'm not sure if I would have made the decision basically on shooting the planets, you know.
Yeah. I think ultimately you can get better results with monochrome. That's still going to be your best results. You know, if you're shooting separate luminance and then separate color channels.
Right.
And the nice thing with the filters too is you can do, you know, the color mapping too. You know, if you're shooting sulfur and O3 and, you know, stuff
Right.
like that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't shoot narrowband though. I've never done it. Yeah, I'm sure it's great. It's great for that, you know.
One thing that was kind of cool when I was there with Tracy, she had the 8-inch Dob set up doing her Messier list, and I just had the camera on the scope. I didn't even put an eyepiece in the 2 nights I was there. And if I wanted to look at something, I would just go over to the Dob. And what I found really cool was that there were some. She was galaxy, hopping in Virgo, and I would swing the scope over, and with the, like, I had the ASI Air, and it's so simple. It's so turnkey nowadays compared to what we went through years ago, that in the amount of time she would star hop to the object, I was able to get like some exposures of it, walk over with my iPad, and then it actually visually helped us, like what we were seeing with the object, to have a reference sitting there on the iPad of this is a photograph of it.
Right.
So
Right.
it was like it was the coolest thing, because we were bouncing back and forth, and I was real time photographing this stuff while she's star hopping.
Yeah.
And it really was complimentary. It wound up being a really neat experience,
Right.
because it actually aided in what we were able to see visually.
Right.
So, like, rather than using sort of averted imagination, it was really like, this is what it is looking like, and this is because I just took a picture of it 2 minutes ago.
Right, right. There's a guy online that he's got a tracker and a wide field camera, and instead of using a finder scope and lining the object up, he just plates off, and moves it. Like he's not even, you know, it just and following it on his phone, you know. He doesn't have a finder scope. It's just amazing.
No more bending over to a finder scope.
Yeah, you know, no visiting an orthopedist, you know, it's unbelievable. It really is, you know. So
I think it's gotten to the point where it really is turnkey, where, you know, it's sort of like, I don't mean this in how it might sound, but it's sort of like anyone could do it. It's gotten so sophisticated and so turnkey that it's just it's really impressive how well integrated everything is.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Oh, we had a question from Nelson about gain changing the density curve, like hybrid film or push processing. That was his question. And I don't remember the details of exactly what hypering film did, other than I know it increased the sensitivity and push processing.
Yeah.
But I think of the gain the same as the ISO setting on a digital camera.
Well, hypering was pretty much to eliminate reciprocity failure.
Reciprocity.
Film.
Yeah, that's right.
And one of the problems with the reciprocity failure was for color film, the reciprocity failure was different in each layer, RG and B. So because one would be, you know, fail more than another, you would have color balance issues as well. So the hypering and cooled emulsion cameras, that was just another form to suppress reciprocity failure, which was like you have a chemical reaction that's taking place in the emulsion, and there would be kind of an equilibrium setup where the reaction starts running in reverse over time. So the speed of the film would actually slow down over time, you know? So the ISO, the ISO ratings, the ASA rating, what were called the ASA ratings back then, would only be working for like the first like half second or quarter second. And
Yeah.
beyond that, like the ratings would actually be going down, you know?
Right.
So that referred to, and I think gain pretty much is just generally an amplification of the signal.
Right. Like any signal, like music or whatever, you can amplify it and increase this, take a small signal and amplify it to a larger signal.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
it does have side effects,
yeah.
and there's trade-offs.
But they would use that
if
like
you-
way back when on Mount Palomar, you know, it was kind of like working with nitroglycerin. They had this little shed that was like 500 feet from the observatory, you know, and they'd have a guy hypering with hydrogen, and later, and nobody died, but later they started using forming gas, which is what plumbers use for certain operations, and that was non-combustible, you know, so many people lived, but you know, you had to keep the
Yeah.
emulsions frozen, and you know, like Lumicon used to be able to ship that kind of film, but by the time you got it, it lost half its speed because it was sitting in a truck. You know, I mean, it was a very, very difficult way to do photography, you
Yeah.
know, back when. you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
they used to
was,
sell, those old spectroscopic films, the 103.
103 AO,
And
103
and
AE.
those films, the reciprocity failure was, they weren't very fast films. They were like 100,
Yeah.
ASA 100 or less, but
Yeah,
they didn't drop off in reciprocity at all. They kind of stayed at that 100 speed or whatever it was,
yeah,
10 speed maybe, for like ever, you know, pretty much. So that's why
Yeah.
they used it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, AO was good for blue, and AF was good for I think what
Was that the
red,
red
and,
or-
and,
yeah.
and AE was good for green. I guess
Yeah.
they somehow manipulated the crystal size and the emulsion. you know?
Yeah, that was weird. Yeah. The
well, the
reciprocity,
technology really spoils us. There's
Yeah,
so
to
many
tell you,
ways it's so much better.
it's a miracle. It's a
Yeah.
miracle.
It's just amazing. Yeah.
now the fun
And-
thing
and-
with the reciprocity failure with the color films
Yeah,
is that I used to go out and calculate the exposure, like during a full moon, what's the correct exposure for a landscape? You know, if it isn't in sunlight, move it down to how bright the moon is, calculate it down, calculate the exposure and shoot it, and let the reciprocity failure just take the colors. And you have this perfectly exposed landscape, but the colors are all shifted. It was kind of cool effect, you know.
Right.
So I would purposely use that to
Yeah.
capture these unusual images of this regular objects, you know, just landscapes and stuff during
right.
a full moon.
Very cool. Very cool.
Okay.
Do we have anything else scheduled?